Thanks for joining me on this episode of The Setup. Season is right around the corner. Today is the 19th of September, and I've been ramping up my preparation, so I thought it'd be fun to talk about the setup that I'll be carrying to the tree stand with me this year. I did do an episode a couple months back talking about the idiot-proof bow, and I'm definitely in favor of keeping things simple, especially for whitetail hunting. And maybe we'll just start with the overall philosophy here, and then we can move into the specifics of what I've got on my bow. I have a really hard time with any shots past 40 yards now on whitetails. Even when I was shooting a lot and was really, I would say, a pretty good archer, anything past 40 was really sketchy because the deer move. And even if you can hit a spot the size of your fist every time at 50 yards, that doesn't mean that the deer is still going to be there when the arrow gets there. So keep that in mind. I feel like 40 yards is a very realistic maximum for somebody who practices a lot and is, well prepared. But it still has to be the right situation, because the deer, they hear the sound of the shot, they react to it, they start to move. Really, anything past 25 yards, the deer have enough time, especially here in the Midwest, and maybe even a shorter distance on the southern deer that are quicker. But anything past 25 yards here, the deer have enough time to lower and drop that kill zone during the time that the arrow's in the air. So keep in mind that you don't need a bow that can drive tacks at 60 yards. You don't need to be a professional archer to be really effective on whitetails. You need a simple system, and you need to get the deer ideally within 25 yards, and that's what I strive for. So let's talk about what I'm going to be carrying this year. This is the RX9 from Hoyt. I had to drop my draw weight 5 pounds this year, and I've been doing a lot of exercises in the gym, and I've gotten my shoulder strength where I can handle 75 pounds pretty easily. So that's where I'm at now. It's a kind of a humbling step when all of a sudden you realize that everything you do from now on, you're going to be going backwards. As a young person, you're thinking, oh, I'm invincible. I'm never going to have to drop my draw weight. Well, this is the year I'm finally having to drop my draw weight. You have to do that. You can't shoot a bow that you can't draw comfortably and hold comfortably while you're aiming. If it creates stress and tension, you're never going to be able to shoot as well as you should be able to. So getting the draw weight right is important. This bow is set up, again, like I said, fairly simply. I've got the B3 Exact Lynx sight on here, and this is a 5-pin aperture on a movable sight frame, and it's super solid. I'll probably keep it set for 20 yards the whole time and just use it as a 5-pin fixed pin sight. I've got 20 through 60, and I won't shoot, like I said, very much past 40 yards except when I'm practicing. I want to practice at 50 and even 60 so that 40 seems like a pretty easy shot. That's why I've got that many pins. Really, for hunting purposes, 3 pins would be enough: 20, 30, 40. And some people have simplified it even further than that, and they have 2 pins. And I've done some studies, and you can even set 1 pin for 25 and do pretty well with that if you know how to make the adjustments. So that's the sight. It's got a lighted, whatever you call that, sight ring, and that's super important, because not only do I need that when I'm in a blind where it's darker inside, but also every year, we're talking about the progression of time, and every year my eyesight gets just a little bit poorer at that distance away that the sight pins are. So whether that's 4 feet in front of me or 3 feet in front of me, I don't see as well at those distances. So being able to have the pin lit makes the bow a lot more accurate. So that's a really nice advantage and a great system. And nothing special about it, but the Hoyt Ultra Rest is a pretty straightforward system that's a full capture rest. Keeps the arrow from popping out. You don't want to get to full draw and find that your arrow isn't resting in the right place. That's a major problem. I've got 2 stabilizers on here. You know, Hoyt has a lot of options. I'm a minimalist. Again, if I was shooting a lot farther or competing, I would definitely take advantage of more stabilizers, probably have a back bar, you know, longer stabilizers on the front. But, you know, this is just a basic system, keeping it simple for 25 to maybe maximum in the low 30-yard shots. I have a fairly large peep. It's a 1/4 inch, I believe. And I like to have a bigger peep so it gives me more visibility when I'm aiming. Because I'll squint my left eye, my non-dominant eye, and then I'll look through the peep and I can see the deer coming into the shooting lane. I just have better control of the shot. You know, the timing is so important with whitetail hunting that you don't want to give up any kind of visibility if you can help it. What else have I got on here that's worth talking about? Again, it's a great bow. I've always loved Hoyt bows. So the RX-9 is just, you know, an extension of their progression in bow design and bow development. Every year they just get a little bit better. And this is the best one that Hoyt's ever made, in my opinion. So let's talk about some of the accessories. I've got the B3 claw. And this is a fairly light trigger tension single hook for attaching to the string knocking loop. I've got a spring trigger on there. And I did that just to remind myself that you have to squeeze the trigger. You know, you don't want to get, even when you're practicing, into the habit of punching the trigger or even pulling it abruptly. You want it to be a nice smooth squeeze, and you can feel that with the spring. You can feel it giving as you're pulling back on it. And that just is a great reminder for me to keep it, you know, smooth, keep a slow squeeze. It's also worth noting that we worked out a deal with B3 to get a discount for our viewers. So you can get anything on their website for 15% off if you type in B3 Winke, all caps, at checkout. Let's talk about arrows real quick. This is the Easton FMJ, and again, there's nothing revolutionary about that. I like the weight of the FMJ type of arrow. You know, that smaller diameter, a little bit heavier weight for whitetail hunting. It aids in penetration. And to me that makes a lot of sense, because on some game, if you hit them in the shoulder, no matter what you're shooting, you're not going to be able to kill them. So, you know, sort of like, it's a moot point if you're thinking, well, I can gain a little bit of extra penetration by doing, you know, one thing or another. But with whitetails, if I hit them in the shoulder with the right setup, I can still kill them. So it's worth taking those steps. And a little bit heavier arrow, a little bit smaller diameter, heavier arrow, and I'll talk about broadheads in a second. That setup makes a lot of sense to me, because like I said, you gain that little extra peace of mind that, you know, you're aiming pretty close to the shoulder if you're going for the center of the vitals. And if you pull the shot just a little bit, you can be in the shoulder or in the flesh, you know, the meaty part of the shoulder. And you want to make sure you got enough penetration to turn that into a kill. So I take advantage of the smaller diameter, slightly heavier weight of the FMJ, or a similar arrow to that. I mean, this isn't necessarily the best arrow on the market. I don't know. It's one that I've shot quite a bit over the years. But that small diameter and weight is what I'm really focused on. And this one has 4 fletches on it. And again, going back to the, you know, the detailed part, you know, what makes a difference and what doesn't, what details are critical to my success. I've sure killed an awful lot of deer with 3-fletched arrows, but I have a lot of respect for a number of people that are recommending 4-fletch. I can't tell the difference, to be honest with you. I think if I was using a shooting machine, or if I was a little bit better shot, you know, at longer distances, I might be able to see a small difference between the 3-fletch and the 4-fletch. But it's a low profile vane, and I do like that, you know, going over the top of the drop away rest. So I gain maybe some advantage there from a tuning standpoint, because some of the 3-fletch options are a little bit higher profile in order to get the same stability. So that's one benefit. Plus, you don't have to worry about indexing it. You know, you don't need to figure out, you know, which way it goes on the rest, because either way you put it on there, because of the 4-fletch, it's going to be the same. So in the moment of truth, you grab an arrow out and stick it on the string. It doesn't really matter if it's, you know, if there's no cock feather, put it that way. Okay, now where are we at? Broadheads. I've got a couple of potential options this year. I'm probably going to stick with the Destruct from B3. It's a really nice fixed blade head, smaller cutting diameter, smaller surface area on the blades, very accurate, very durable. I shot a lot of deer with that in the past couple of years, and I've had really good success with it. But if I'm struggling for some reason getting the bow to shoot well, I'll probably go to their RD2, and that's a rear deploy mechanical broadhead. And again, I feel like I'm accurate enough with these little small fixed blade heads that even with a little bit of crosswind or maybe a rough release, I'm still going to be fine with the fixed blade. But that's one of the forgiving aspects of the mechanicals. You don't get nearly as much of a effect on a crosswind or a rough release when you don't have the surface area on the broadhead to steer the arrow. And that kind of does come back to the arrow diameter again too, and to a lesser extent the fletching size. Shooting in a crosswind, the smaller diameter of the arrow and the less profile of the fletching, the better, because you don't have as much surface area for the wind to push against. So, it's probably a bigger deal for a Western hunter taking longer shots, but it's a small, maybe a little small margin of benefit that you gain there. Well, that's my setup for this year. I'm excited about the season. Gosh, like I said, it's just a couple weeks away, and we don't have a ton of stuff patterned and ready to go, but we're definitely gonna be hunting some does, and I found a buck that I think is gonna work out really well, hopefully to get Jordan on early. So those are some targets I think we're gonna be able to go after early. Well, I appreciate you joining me. I'll see you right back here again soon for the next episode of The Setup. And remember to always dream big.